What do you think is the most sinful trait in Crusader Kings 3? Before we can answer that, we need to break down how sin actually works in CK3. In most faiths, sinfulness is determined by the tenets, the 3 unique quirks or religious practices that every faith gets. Tenets decide which character's traits are considered virtuous or sinful. On top of that, certain doctrines can also make traits a virtuous or sinful one, such as witchcraft or deviance. Every faith also comes with a set base virtuous and sinful shared across the religious group. For example, all Christian faiths consider sadistic, lustful, and vengeful to be sinful traits. Unfortunately, you can't create a completely sinless faith unless you dip into debug mode and start bending the rules. What is the most sinful trait in the game? At first glance, you might think it's glutton, since 9 different tenets mark it as sinful. But when you zoom out and look at every faith in CK3, it turns out the real answer is a toss-up between deceitful and greedy. A huge number of faiths list them as base sin, and on top of that, around 5 tenets each also flag them as sinful. And the reason we're spending so much time talking about faith and tenets is simple. Today we're ranking every tenet in Crusader Kings 3, just over 70 tenets in total. Piety cost won't factor into our ranking since it can vary widely depending on your faith. Instead, we're judging each tenet based on one core idea. Is it something you'd want in a faith you plan on sticking with for hundreds of years while building a long-lasting dynasty? We'll be splitting the tenets into 3 categories: common, available to almost every faith; restricted, limited to specific religions; and syncretic. The tenets let you get along with entire groups of faiths. So buckle up, grab some snacks, because this one's gonna take a while to rank. The first common tenet is adaptive, and at first glance it feels pretty middle of the road. So what does it actually do? Adaptive makes it harder for other faiths to convert counties away from religions that have this tenet. It also improves opinion between characters of different faiths, reduces popular opinion penalties by 25%, and makes vassals of other faiths less likely to join independent or populist factions. The only requirement to add this to your faith is to have the pluralist attitude under attitude doctrines. Overall, it seems just okay on paper, but it can be very useful during large-scale conquests when you don't want constant religious unrest and populist factions slowing you down. For me, it lands it in a B tier. In the shorter campaign, you probably won't feel the impact much, especially with how fast conversions can be, but in the long campaign or world conquest run, it's definitely worth consideration. Asceticism. Asceticism is one of those tenets I've only experimented with a handful of times in Crusader Kings 3. It unlocks 2 decisions. The first is meditate in seclusion, which can be a solid way to reduce stress, though it takes roughly 6 months to complete and only offers a small chance to boost your learning on top of the stress loss. The second is become an adventurer, which does exactly what it sounds like. Assuming you meet the requirements, it allows your character to leave everything behind and go adventuring. On top of that, asceticism makes temperate a virtuous trait, while gluttony, greedy, and eager reveler are considered sinful traits for your faith. Overall, I'd rate asceticism as a C tier. There are far easier and more efficient ways to manage stress and increase learning. That said, the ability to become an adventurer is relatively rare outside of special culture traditions or starting as one during a character transfer, which gives the tenet at least some niche value. Astrology or divination, if your faith is Zoroastrian, is a great tenet if you want faster ships in CK3. Is that always useful? Not necessarily, but it really shines in something like All Under Heaven, where you're crossing massive stretches of the Pacific. The real standout bonus, though, is the Divine Stars decision, giving you a random chance to boost one of your stats by 2 and increasing lifestyle experience gain by 25%, depending on your traits. That can noticeably speed up your perk progression, cutting it down from roughly every 3 years to closer to every 2.5. Astrology is an easy A tier for me. I'm a sucker for good RNG, and when luck is on your side, you can fly through an entire lifestyle far faster than usual. On top of that, it doesn't mark any of the traits as sinful, which is always a nice bonus. Next up is Carnal Exaltation. Unsurprisingly, only one faith starts with it in CK3, Messianism, one of the more out there Christian faiths in CK3, which believes that God can be perceived through carnal senses, straight up from the in-game description. So, what does it actually do for your character? As you'd expect, it grants a hefty fertility to all your followers. Beyond the baby boom, it allows deviance to be treated as a virtuous trait. No more being king-shamed by society, instead it is something to be openly celebrated. Naturally, lustful becomes a virtue while chaste is marked as sinful. Carnal Exaltation is a great roleplay tenet, but outside of that, its particular value is pretty limited. Fertility bonuses are easier to stack up through other mechanics. Making deviant virtuous rarely feels worth the piety cost of changing doctrines. Because of that, I will be giving this tenet a C rank. Communal Identity, or chosen people if you're playing as a Jewish faith, is easily one of the most annoying tenets to deal with when you're on the receiving end of it. It gives a +10 opinion with characters of the same faith and boosts culture and faith conversion speeds by a massive 50%. Sounds great, right? Here's the catch. The county you're converting has to already share either your faith or your culture to be getting this bonus. If you're trying to convert a county that is both a different faith and a different culture, you're instead getting a -50 penalty. Depending on your court chaplain or faith leader, that can make conversions take an absurd amount of time. If you're unreformed and running this tenet, you can basically forget about converting anyone. It can nearly take the lifespan of 2 characters to convert 1 county. There are no virtuous or sinful traits tied to communal identity, but that doesn't really save it. For me, communal identity is a clear D tier, and every time I run into it, it's a pain. So it always feels like you never get through the right culture faith combo to benefit from bonuses, end up stuck with just the downsides. I honestly take almost any other tenet over this, even Carnal Exaltation. As I move further down this list, I'm realizing just how little I've actually used some of these tenets. That is especially true for Communal Possessions, since only a couple faiths, mainly Zoroastrian denominations, have access to it. When Legacy of Persia was released, I didn't spend much time engaging with that content, so my experience with the tenet is pretty limited. So what are the benefits of Communal Possessions? If your goal is to farm piety by gifting artifacts, this tenet really shines. Depending on the artifact quality, you can earn anywhere from 50 to 500 piety, along with +10 popular opinion and reduced building costs at the expense of control growth. One thing I generally enjoy about this tenet is the artwork. It gives off strong Soviet propaganda vibes with 2 workers holding grain together. Another plus is that there are no prerequisites to unlock it, though it does make peasant leaders virtuous while turning arrogant into a sinful trait. For where Communal Possessions rank overall, I'd place it above Communal Identity, but below Astrology, giving it a solid B. Just a fun, flavorful concept, but in the long run, it tends to fall off. The piety becomes easier to tame from many other sources, which makes this tenet feel less impactful over time. Fun to try, but not something I'd commit for the long haul. Communion is probably one of the tenets most players are familiar with, since Catholics have it as one of the core 3. It allows you to trade gold for piety or pay to have your sins absolved. On top of that, it gives the head of faith the power to excommunicate followers, which can be a death sentence for certain rulers. Excommunication comes with severe penalties and grants every follower of that faith a CB to remove that excommunicated ruler from power. Honestly, a campaign centered around hunting down excommunicated rulers, whether they're landless or landed, would be a pretty chaotic and fun run. Staying on topic, communion becomes especially powerful if you're also the head of faith and set all crime doctrines to criminal. In that setup, you'll be absolutely flooded with gold and non-stop notifications from people trying to buy their way back into your good graces. As for this ranking, communion is an easily S tier. Being able to request money from your head of faith for a mere 250 piety is incredibly strong, and paying out scales with your rank, meaning higher tier rulers get even richer. And if you're the head of faith, you basically get to reenact Scrooge McDuck Money Vault. Was honestly the main reason I managed to stay financially solvent during my world conquests all those years ago. Chthonic Redoubt is a bit of an oddball tenet, mainly because it entirely focuses on mountains and desert mountains. If you've ever wanted to roleplay as a race of giants, this is absolutely the tenet for you. It provides increased levies, better combat advantage, reduction in attrition, and faster county conversion, plus culture promotion in mountains or desert mountain terrains. Only 3 faiths start with Chthonic Redoubt: Apostle, North African, and the Secret Faith era Zerach. It also gives giants their moment in the spotlight by making giant a virtuous trait and has no prerequisites, meaning any faith can adopt it. This tenet really shines in the regions like Persia or the Alps, where mountainous terrain dominates and you can fully take advantage of these bonuses. In terms of ranking, its niche nature holds it back, so I'd place it at a B. In most playthroughs, you'd never seriously consider it, since the majority of your lands wouldn't benefit from the terrain bonuses aside from the giant virtue. However, in a rare case where you control mostly mountainous regions, it can be incredibly strong. A small tweak, such as making dwarfism a sinful trait, could make this tenet even more thematic. Cranial Trophies is all about collecting souvenirs after you've done some hands-on labor. You can obtain these skull artifacts by winning duels, killing enemies in combat, or simply capturing someone and relieving them of their head. At the moment, the only faith that starts with this tenet is Kerrigan, which is found on the Isle of Kalimantan in Southeast Asia. That said, any faith can adopt it if you're willing to spend 2,000 piety. The tenet itself grants 3 prowess, jungle fighting bonuses, reduced jungle attrition, and piety for executions based on victim level of prestige. The quality of the Cranial Trophy depends on the rank of the character. Higher rank targets produce better artifacts with stronger stats. The best possible trophy comes from the taking down top tier rulers, aka emperors and hegemons. Ranking Cranial Trophy is a bit tricky because it's a very much a meme tenet. It only has it's one of the few tenets that directly boosts prowess. Stockpile of artifacts to hand out to courtiers and vassals is a nice bonus, since gifting artifacts is another way to boost opinion. I'd love to give it an S tier, but the fact that it is locked behind a paid DLC hurts its value in my eyes. Because of that, it will settle for a comfortable A tier. Now we're getting to the real bread and butter tenets on this list for CK3. Divine Marriage allows characters to marry close family members, and I mean Targaryen level close. You do need to have unrestricted marriage doctrine enabled, but once that's in place, the family tree becomes more of a family circle. Grants piety for marriage of a close relative and provides +10 bonus with a vassal while you are married to a close family member. It also makes incest and pure blood traits virtuous. Let's be honest, every CK3 player has experimented with unrestricted marriage at least once, purely for the stats and definitely not for other questionable reasons. Divine Marriage is pretty straightforward. C tier. You can get practical benefits just by choosing unrestricted marriage doctrine, so spending one of your limited tenet slots to further boost incest mechanic usually isn't worth it, unless you're leaning heavily into a very specific committed role play. The next one is the Pentacarchy or Ecclesiarchy, depending on whether you're Orthodox or not. This CK3 tenet provides opinion bonuses when pilgrimages are complete, but only for clergy members. As far as bonuses go, that part is merely decent. More importantly, it grants +1 fervor for each holy site you control, up to a maximum 5 per year. You might be wondering, what exactly is fervor? It's a mechanic that many players tend to overlook because its impact feels subtle. However, it matters in 3 ways. The lower your fervor increases the frequency of heresy. The second, the higher the fervor speeds up the conversion significantly. Finally, you'll need at least 75 fervor to declare a great holy war such as a crusade. As for ranking of Ecclesiarchy, it comfortably earns an A tier. Giving up to 5 fervor annually is huge, one of the few reliable ways to sustain fervor outside of culture bonuses. This is especially valuable for large faiths, which often lose fervor due to AI and player-led holy wars happening year after year. On top of that, a faster conversion is always a welcome benefit. Esotericism, or Kabbalah for the Jewish faith, is a tenet that centers around wise man or wise woman trait in CK3. This trait grants up to 3 additional levels of learning, with further upgrades gaining through travel and learning related events. This tenet synchronizes well with it, as it increases the chance of acquiring that trait when you're focusing on learning and allows you to level it up through pilgrimages in addition to the usual methods. Feels underwhelming. In my experience, if you pursue the learning lifestyle without this tenet, you'll often end up with the wise person trait anyways. Even a single pilgrimage is usually enough to acquire it. If you have a culture tradition that strongly synthesizes with wise person trait, then I would see the case of taking it. However, for long-term play, this tenet does not feel worthwhile to me it's a solid D tier. It's kind of surprising to me that not a single faith in Crusader Kings 3 actually uses the tenet Exaltation of Pain. It's a torture-focused tenet that nobody seems to want. So, Exaltation of Pain offer, instead of losing piety when torturing prisoners, you actually gain piety. You also suffer less stress when becoming tortured yourself, and you gain additional piety from the decision to flagellate yourself. Sadistic traits is considered virtuous, while compassionate is treated as a sin. Honestly, never considered taking this tenet in my thousands of hours of play. That said, it could be a fun role play option, and that there's probably some niche or cheesy strategies that pair well with it that I'm just not aware of. Still, at the end of the day, I've got to give this a D tier ranking. The more I dig into these tenets, the more I feel like Paradox has favorites in CK3, and Gnosticism might be one of them. So what does it do for your faith? It reduces stewardship by 2, but boosts learning by 2 as well, making it great for scholars. It also provides stress reduction when granting titles, scaling by rank, -5 for counties, -15 for duchies, -65 for kingdoms, and massive 160 for empires. On top of that, the faith that share Gnosticism are considered righteous, making it easier to marry into them since you avoid the usual penalties for marrying different faiths. With 9 faiths starting with this tenet, that's significantly large pool of potential marriage partners. Temperate is considered virtuous, while glutton is sinful. The only requirements to adopt it into your faith is you cannot have Eastern syncretism tenet. Ranking Gnosticism would be a solid B. The stress debuff could be clutch when you're trying to not die from a heart attack, and being able to marry someone in a random faith around the map is a nice addition. Legalism in Crusader Kings 3 comes with a flavored text. A sinner, no matter who, will never be above the law. And it really lives up to that. The tenet itself makes it easier for virtuous characters to change laws, reduce the cost by 10 per virtuous trait, up to 3 traits. Conversely, simple traits increase the cost with no cap according to the wiki. On top of that, the characters are less likely to join factions if their liege has a virtuous trait, and more likely if a liege has a sinful trait. If you have election succession laws, electors are also more inclined to vote for the liege choice if the liege is just. There are no requirements to add this tenet to your faith. Basically, being a sinner under legalism is a very bad idea. While the law cost reduction is interesting, it is not game breaking since you can usually offset it. The real strength of legalism lies in the election and faction management, securing early game election support and reducing the risk of vassals joining factions just by being virtuous. For this reason, I'll rank legalism as an A. What can I say? I really don't want to deal with factions. Literalism is another decision-focused tenet, unlocking the literalist debate interaction with characters of the same faith. So what does this debate involve? Ever want to have a theological showdown over scripture? Now you can. You can challenge direct vassals, co-vassals, or your own liege and throw down the toughest argument about the Lord. You can enter debate with any adult of your faith, win and you gain piety, lose and you suffer the slight and lose some piety, naturally making characters with scholarly, astute intellect, masterful philosopher, or erudite oracle trait especially formidable in debates. I'd rank literalism as a C. The concept of arguing over holy texts with barely literate peasants is amusing, but it is just not worth taking up a limited tenet slot. As we've stated before, if we were building a giant faith in CK3, Megalithic Construction would definitely be part of it. Interestingly enough, the North African faith already has 2 tenets that would fit the giant theme. I probably pair this with Adorism or Communion, rounding out our unusual religion. So what does Megalithic Construction actually do? It unlocks 2 different buildings, one for duchies and the other one which can only be constructed in temples, granting development, prestige, and piety. It also provides bonuses to development, taxes, and levies, but only in hill terrain. Combined with Chthonic Redoubt, this makes it perfect for exploiting hilly and mountainous regions. There are no requirements and no traits are marked as virtuous or sinful. As for ranking it, it offers solid benefits, but only if you're in the right terrain. The duchy level building is particularly useful early on, though it becomes obsolete mid or late game since it cannot be upgraded. I'd slot Megalithic Construction in a B alongside other hill and mountainous focused tenet. What's next on our CK3 tenet ranking list? Of course, it's Mendicant Preacher, a tenet which surprisingly has a wide range of use. First and foremost, it boosts county conversion speed by 33%. For example, a chaplain with a level 20 learning provides additional 0.82 monthly conversion progress, which adds up quickly. It also grants bonuses on pilgrimages completed, giving a 33% discount to Holy Order's hiring costs. Why is 33% the magic number? Who knows, but it is nice to have. Lastly, it unlocks Become an Adventurer decision. As mentioned earlier, this is a neat option, though fairly limited since you can only take it if you're a Duke rank or lower. As for the virtuous and sinful traits, temperate is considered virtuous, while gluttonous is sinful. Overall, Mendicant Preacher earns an A tier ranking for me. Conversion speed alone justifies taking it, and while the other bonuses are more situational, they're still a welcome addition. Mind without mind is a tenet that doesn't look very impressive at first glance, but once you break it down, it might actually be one of the best options you can add to your faith. The stress gain reduction is always welcome, and the prowess injury resistance is fine, if a bit unexciting. The increased inspiration artifact quality is more interesting. If that effectively bumps artifact up a tier on completion, you're far more likely to end up with masterwork or better items. That's great for handing out artifacts for opinion boosts or breaking them down for resources, though you'll still need another cultural tradition to dismantle famed and illustrious artifacts. The real standout though is the minus 50% chance to gain Infirm. How many times Infirm has cut a character's life short? It tanks your stats, lowers your health, fertility, and dread, and completely locks you out of hunts and tournaments. Across all my CK3 campaigns, it feels like most of my characters eventually end up with this trait. Though it does not make it impossible to get Infirm, it is still a nice bonus. Because of that alone, this might be a bit biased, but I hate Infirm so much that I'm seriously considering running Mind Without Mind in most of my custom faiths going forward. For me, this is an easy S tier. Do you have a second or third son you'd like to quietly remove from the line of succession? Maybe a daughter who's gotten a little too familiar with one of your knights, or a vassal who just won't stop yapping in your ear about nonsense? Well, today I've got a CK3 tenet for you. Monasticism lets you send almost anyone you don't like off to a monastery. They'll spend their days wandering the cloisters, praying to their lord on behalf of your realm, and best of all, not being your problem anymore. All you need to do is not have hedonistic tenets, and you can banish most of the members of your faith to a life of robes, prayer, and quiet isolation. As for the ranking of monasticism, it is another single decision tenet, and those rarely perform well. I'll give this a C tier. In practice, it often is easier just to toss unwanted characters into the dungeon and let nature take its course, rather than convincing them that their one true love is the Lord. Natural primitivism is the content creator's least favorite tenet. When I first started making CK3 content, I learned very quickly that this tenet existed. Suddenly, there were topless characters all over my stream. So besides saving on laundry bills, what does this tenet actually do? On the positive side, it is extremely good at stress management, significantly reducing stress gain while increasing stress loss. The downside though, and there are many, the law costs are much higher. Tyranny gain increases by 100%. That can be pretty brutal, especially when events already slap you with large tyranny hits. Change just a couple of feudal contracts and you might already be flirting with a full-blown revolt. As for the requirements, your new nudist faith can't have any crime doctrines set to criminal. Also, the only faith that starts with this tenet is Adamites. When it comes to ranking natural primitivism, the stress bonuses are generally strong, but the tyranny penalties are too punishing for how I tend to play. I'd lose the kingdom faster than YouTube pulls the ads from my video if I had full nudity. For me, this one lands it in a C tier. Polyamory is a largely redundant tenet. There's already a doctrine that allows it, along with a cultural tradition that lets you take multiple spouses. So what, if anything, make this tenet different? Its main perk removes opinion penalties for extramarital relationships, and mothers will always reveal children's real fathers. Basically, you can host your own medieval Jerry Springer episode publicly announcing who the true father is in court. This is an easy D tier. It doesn't offer anything you can't already get through other doctrines or traditions. That said, it might still be worth slotting it into a meme faith purely for the chaos and dramatic. Isn't this what CK3 is all about? The pursuit of power, massive armies or overflowing treasuries, or perfectly bred heirs. Power is the end goal. If you agree with this mindset, then the pursuit of power is the tenet you want to seriously consider. So what does it bring to your faith? First, you get a huge 50% discount on title creation. Along with a 50% reduction in tyranny gain, the trade-off is that you direct vassals won't like you as much. In return, you'll gain access to Conquer CB and a once per lifetime invasion CB, letting you declare war on basically any neighboring rulers whenever you'd want. There are no requirements to add this tenet to your faith. It treats ambitious and disloyal characters favorably, while content and loyal characters are considered sinful. Somewhat surprising that no faith starts with this tenet, probably because society built entirely on ambition doesn't exactly promote stability. Just look at the Sith and the rule of two. Unchecked ambition tends to blow up everyone's plans eventually. As for ranking, pursuit of power earns an A tier. The CBs are excellent, cheaper titles are always welcome, and only real downside is that you'll constantly need to watch your back. This next tenet goes by 3 different names in CK3. Halakha for Jewish faiths, fatwas for Muslim faiths, and religious law for everyone else. It has no virtuous or sinful traits tied to it, and no special requirements beyond having enough piety to enact. This tenet offers 2 main benefits. First, it provides a reduction to law costs. Second, it unlocks the temporal condemnation interaction with vassals. This lets you condemn any vassals who have more sinful traits than you. To use it, you'll need at least 14 learning. Once condemned, you gain the right to revoke their title, though whether they accept peacefully is another matter. This interaction can only be used once every 5 years. Religious law stands out because it gives you a direct tool to meddle with and punish sinful vassals. Overall, I really like this tenet and can see it fitting into almost any faith A tier. I might be missing something with this next tenet, but it feels like it's more trouble than it's worth. Righteous Rebirth is a tenet in CK3 that any faith can have access to. On paper, it gives you some nice bonuses: county conversion resistance, stress loss, and chance for counties and characters to reconvert back to your faith. The problem is the downsides, and they are brutal. Peasant and populist factions become more common. Your stress loss per level of fame is reduced, meaning level 4 fame, you completely negate the 35% stress bonus. And worst of all, peasant and populist factions gain 50% more military power. That's a massive deal breaker. Imagine running a world-spanning empire, dealing with major revolts every 2 or 3 years across half your realm. Sure, if your goal is to make your campaign as tedious and punishing as possible, this tenet will definitely do that. For everyone else, I recommend staying far away. For me, Righteous Rebirth is a clear D tier. It's awful for world conquest, but if you are a glutton for punishment and want an extra layer of challenge, this might be the tenet for you. Do you like eating people? Does human flesh sound good? Then you probably should know about Kuru. Kuru is a rare, incurable, and fatal neurodegenerative disease that causes tremors and loss of coordination, with an incubation period that can last anywhere between 10 and 50 years. So what does that have to do with CK3's faith tenets? Well, ritualized cannibalism is next on the list, and honestly, it'd be kind of interesting if Paradox added a Kuru-like disease to the game. It would add a grim bit of realism and extra layer of risk. In CK3, ritualized cannibalism does one simple thing. It makes cannibalism no longer a criminal act and turns cannibals into a virtuous trait. Even if your followers are actually technically shortening their lifespans by snacking on human flesh, society is totally fine with it. This is basically the only way to fully decriminalize cannibalism. Because of that, I placed ritualized cannibalism in the B tier. I probably won't ever use it myself, but it's absolutely a meme tenet with some niche appeal. What's next on our CK3 tenet ranking list? Ritual celebration, which is possibly the most common tenet after monasticism. Which makes sense, most cultures love a good party with plenty of food and good company. So, how does this translate into CK3? First, you'll gain additional piety from hosting feasts, but you'll lose piety if you refuse to attend one, since vassals and other rulers can absolutely spam you with feast invitations. On top of that, the tenet provides a small opinion boost with vassals and courtiers. Finally, it lets you build breweries in temple holdings, something that normally restricted to Catholics only. So where does ritualized celebration land compared to the other tenets? access to temple breweries, the positive opinion modifiers, and the extra piety are all solid benefits, placing it in a firm B tier. The only thing that's keeping it from ranking higher is the minus 100 piety for refusing feast invitations. And as mentioned before, the AI can be a little too eager to invite you out. Probably tired of me saying this, but another CK3 tenet that I have little to no experience with is Sacred Lies. I've never really thought about its bonuses and tend to play a certain way. There are a few you almost always default to. So what does Sacred Lies actually bring to the table? First, it allows you to gain 50 piety on successful completions of any hostile scheme, whether it be a murder, kidnapping, fabricating a secret, or even stealing a herd. You're rewarded with piety for pulling it off. Next, it grants plus 20 agent acceptance, which is one of the few ways to get this modifier in the game. Unfortunately, this bonus only applies to characters of your faith or those whose faith also has this Sacred Lies tenet. Lastly, you gain a bonus to whispered countermeasures, which honestly might be the best part. While it slightly reduces the amount of money and prestige you gain, it provides a minus 35% secrecy to hostile schemes targeting your court. This can be huge to prevent you or your family from getting quietly removed. Sacred Lies sits at a B tier. For me, plus 20 agency acceptance applied to all characters, it would probably jump up to an A rank. Yet another mountain-focused tenet for your future mountain faith, Sacred Mountains. This tenet allows you to construct buildings in mountains and desert mountain terrain at reduced costs of 35%, making development in harsh terrains far more affordable. It also grants 100 piety when you visit holy sites located in mountain regions. Lastly, certain command and character traits receive bonuses when fighting in mountains. I dug through the files and checked a wide range of traits, but I couldn't find a clear detail on exactly what was changed, so it seems there's bonuses only applied to a limited number of specific traits. As for ranking Sacred Mountains, it's a solid choice if your realm is surrounded by mountains. Outside of that niche, most of the value comes from the extra piety. Because of that, I'd place this tenet at a B tier overall. Sacred Murder, also known as Fidin in some Muslim faiths, is a tenet that many players may never have encountered. That's because it's an exclusive tenet introduced with Legacy of Persia DLC. You can definitely tell it's locked behind a DLC because it comes packed with 7 buffs and debuffs. First, it grants all followers of the faith a bonus to prowess and controlled territory defense advantage. On top of that, gain 0.01 monthly piety per point of dread, meaning at max dread you can earn 1 full piety per month. By far the most interesting part of the tenet is the unlocking the Master Assassin Court position, which is the only way to access this role in the game as a landed character. Master Assassin actually do, in their normal duties, their shortened scheme phases and increased hostile scheme success chance. When assigned to brewing potions, they provide additional secrecy to your schemes, double their potential, albeit at the cost of extra gold. As for the downside, there is a notable drawback. You suffer a 10% chance of increased death or injury in battle. All things considered, this feels like an S tier, but as we said before, because it was locked behind a DLC, we are going to drop it down to actually an A tier. The natural world is the creation of the divine, and we are merely guests within it. So what do you actually get for trying to preserve nature in CK3? For starters, everyone likes you a little bit more thanks to the flat opinion bonus. You also gain a combat advantage in forests, jungles, and taiga terrain, which, depending on your game settings, can be the difference between winning or losing an entire war. On top of that, you suffer reduced attrition in those same terrains. All of those, however, come at the cost of increased building costs. Quick aside, it's pretty amusing that Paradox gave this tenet to Waki Faith, considering they only control about 2 forest tiles in their entire region. They're out here trying to defend all their lands, yet only gain an advantage in a tiny part of their forests. Kind of silly. So where does Sanctity of Nature tenet land overall? Since most of the map isn't made up of forests, jungle, or taiga, there are only a few regions this tenet really shines, such as Siberia, Southeast Asia, parts of the Indian subcontinent, and obviously there's some sporadic parts here in China and then the steppe. If you're not playing in those areas, you're essentially paying 10% building costs in exchange for a 5 opinion boost. It would make much more sense if you could choose 3 terrain types to hold sacred, though that might be too overpowered when paired with other tenets. Either way, Sanctity of Nature ends up earning a C tier from me. Next on our CK3 tenet list is Unrelenting Faith. or Righteous Rebellion if you're playing as a Zoroastrian faith. Right out of the gates, it looks like a pretty strong tenet until you realize that one of the doctrines already covers most of what this tenet offers. Getting a base +4 prowess for every one in your faith is a solid start, and the +2 faith hostile advantage is another nice bonus. On top of that, the members of the clergy can serve as commanders or knights. Clerical function is recruitment. You get nearly all of those benefits minus the advantage against hostile faiths. When stacked together, this effectively gives everyone in your faith a base of 8 prowess, which is undeniably strong. That said, unless you're intentionally trying to create a nation of space marines, it feels like a redundant use of a tenet slot. I've basically already made my feelings clear, but to put a rank to it, C tier. Money corrupts the heart of men and pushes them away from the true faith. Spoken like a true peasant. And look, I'm poor in real life. I don't need to be poor in this game too. Vow of Poverty is an okay CK3 tenet at best, and honestly probably deserves a D tier ranking. Yes, it lets you become an adventurer, but that's not all that interesting when paired with the taking Vow of Poverty decision. This decision gives you the modifier that applies -20 gold accumulation in exchange for a small amount of opinion bonuses and +2 monthly piety. Depending on your income, this gold loss can be pretty significant. If they made this a scaling tenet, I'd be more interested. The more gold you give up each month, the more piety you should receive in return. Losing 1 gold per month for 2 piety isn't bad if you're a realm pulling hundreds or even thousands of gold every month. That trade-off doesn't feel fair at that point. So yeah, D tier. Until you make this reward proportional to how much money you're actually sacrificing, I'm not interested. We're a little bit under halfway through this video. Beseech you to please subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. It really does help us grow and expand, get us some brand deals as well as other financial support. That's all I have to say. Let's keep this video going. We have about another 30 or so minutes on the way. Aterism is the first tenet on our list that are only available to certain religions, currently exclusive to just 5 faiths, all pagan. Before Under Heaven was released, only 2 African faiths, the Hausa and Akan, had access to it. If you've never done a Mother of Us All run, then a very good chance you've never experienced the wonders of this tenet. At first glance, it looks like a fairly average one-off decision, but it is actually extremely powerful if RNGesus is on your side. The Seek Aid of the Spirits decision gives you 4 options, but realistically, you should only ever pick the top 2 if you want a positive outcome. You offer a gold to the spirits, and in return, they can grant you a boon, +3 to one of your stats, reducing stress gain, a small health boost, increasing fertility, +4 prowess or dread gain, and the modifier lasts for 20 years. That's not all. If you're lucky, you can also walk away with strong and or shrewd trait, making this one of the easiest ways to gain access to those traits. A bad roll can give you possessed, ill, impotent, or infirm. Once you become possessed, you can no longer take this decision again, which honestly feels like a fair trade. Out of all the tenets that are purely decision-based, this is easily the best one. The benefits far outweigh the risk, so I've given Aterism an S tier ranking. Too bad most players will never experience it. The following tenet is only available to Christians and followers of Allah in Crusader Kings 3. Alexandrian Catechism or Islamic rationalism is a tenet made for all you learning fanatics out there. It increases learning lifestyle experience gained by 20%, gives +2 learning per level of stress, and makes scholar a virtuous one. You can take this tenet if your faith has fundamentalist attitude doctrine, and it must either be Christian or Muslim, which honestly makes sense since only the scholars tied to Alexandria would realistically have access to these texts. Planning a run with several learning focused characters, this could be the tenet for you. The potential +6 learning at high stress is nice, but you're also living on the edge of stress-induced heart attack. Overall, a solid tenet, but not an amazing one, so I'm placing it in B tier. Bing boom bam. I stand corrected on which tenet appears in the most faiths. It's actually Ancestor Worship, which shows up in around 29 religions. It seems Paradox uses this as a kind of catch-all tenet for unreformed and pagan faiths. Ancestor Worship is an interesting one, mostly because its bonuses are heavily focused on opinion. You get +5 close family opinion, completing a pilgrimage grants +10 close family opinion for 10 years, and you also gain +50% max long reign opinion bonus. That modifier is especially interesting because it scales on your level of splendor. The higher your splendor, the more prestige your children gain at birth, and the more prestige characters receive when you marry into your house. That's great if you want the AI around you to rack up 1 to 2k prestige, but as the player, you don't really feel most of these benefits unless you start heavily intermarrying with the family. Overall, it's a neat concept, but a very situational one. I wouldn't add Ancestor Worship to my faith unless I had a specific campaign in mind, so I'm giving it a C. Anicanism shows up in a small handful of faith groups, including Jewish, Muslim, Christian faiths along dualist religions. Anicanism gives you cheaper and faster temple holdings and temple building construction, reducing both cost and building time by 33%. Its only unique bonus is what really sets it apart. It allows you to destroy higher tier artifacts, specifically famed and illustrious items, your blues and purples, essentially. When you destroy these artifacts, you gain piety in return, ranging from around 180 piety for famed artifacts up to 500 piety for illustrious ones. Honestly, this opens the door for pretty fun campaign idea, playing as an adventurer, roaming around and burning legendary artifacts in the name of the Lord. So, how does Anicanism stack up? It's one of the only ways to destroy high tier artifacts, which is undeniably cool. That said, it also costs a significant amount of piety on top of the gold that you had already sunk into repairing or reforging those artifacts. Because of the sheer uniqueness alone, I'm giving Anicanism a B. Following that, we have armed pilgrimages. Only Catholics start with this tenet by default in Crusader Kings 3, but any Christian or Jewish faith can adopt it as long as they don't have pacifism as a tenet in their faith. Armed pilgrimage is all about holy wars. It reduces the cost of declaring them and allows your head of faith to call a great holy war. Interestingly, if your faith doesn't have a head of faith, the tenet instead boosts religious conversion up to 1.25 additional monthly conversion progress if you control all of your holy sites. Lastly, it also adds extra points towards acolyte glory gain, a system that most players probably forget exists since it's tucked away in the Knights tab and only becomes relevant if you have tours and tournaments. So where does armed pilgrimage land on our ranking system? I'm giving it a B. Cheaper holy wars and access to great holy wars are a bonus, and the conversion speed boost is nice. Lesser known perks, especially if you're trying to convert your lands quickly. Obviously, this would be ranked higher if Crusades were fixed in the base game. Every one of us is born with a destiny, but the most important are the Taltos, those chosen from birth to wield magic powers and serve as spiritual leaders. That's the idea behind Auspicious Birthright. So, how does it translate into CK3 gameplay? Characters with Wise Woman or Wise Man trait are considered virtuous, meaning you can gain 5 piety per month simply for having this trait. In theory, you could pair this with Esotericism for even more piety monthly. That said, Paradox does not allow virtuous traits bonuses to stack, so only the highest piety gain applies, which just goes to show that Paradox doesn't want us to have any fun. This was exclusive to Telutism's faith, but with All Under Heaven, it was also added to the Moistism. Yes, the Moist faith. Weirdly enough, this did not update the flavor text, so it feels a bit disjointed when looking at the tenet with them. Overall, Auspicious Birthright is a fun little tenet, but is 5 piety per month really enough to matter? Not really, especially when only available for a very limited number of faiths. I won't be too harsh on this one, I'm gonna give it a C. It would rank higher if piety stacks were allowed. Y'all are probably tired of me talking about this, but here's another All Under Heaven exclusive tenet. Benevolent Governance. It's designed for celestial and meritocracy government types, though honestly, I feel just about anyone could make use of it if they really wanted to. Instead of investing points into the traveler lifestyle, every follower of this faith gains access to the inspection activity. For those who don't know, inspections can do a wide range of things, everything from gaining claims, increasing vassalization acceptance, and straight up earning cash, and several other useful outcomes. You can perform an inspection every 2 years. Benevolent Governance also grants piety for participating in inspections, but comes with a trade-off, significantly reducing dread gain. For some players, that might be too much of a tough sell. This was a lifestyle perk I use constantly, like centralization in stewardship lifestyle or healthy in learning. I'd absolutely be hyped. As it stands though, it's solid. I'd give it a B tier ranking. Bhakti, or Patron Gods if you have the Northern Lords DLC for Crusader Kings 3, is another decision-based tenet available only to Asatru faiths and all Hindu faiths. It allows followers to choose a deity that best represents their character. For Astrology, you can choose between 3 gods, with a 4th option unlocked if your realm capital is located in the Kingdom of Denmark. In my opinion, the clearest standouts are Thor or Odin. Hindu faiths work a bit differently, but the available deities and their modifiers vary depending on the specific branch of Hinduism. Vaishnavism, Samartism, and a custom Hindu faith each have their own distinct gods and bonuses, which honestly surprises me since I'd expect them all to be standardized. I'm also surprised that more faiths don't have access to this system, but it's probably due to localization and design complexity. Setting up a unique pantheon, flavor text, and modifiers for every faith would be a huge headache. Patron Gods / Bhakti is an S tier tenet for me. The level of customization it adds is fantastic, and that alone adds it a higher rank. Extinction of Dharma is a tenet introduced with All Under Heaven DLC and is only available for a single faith in the game, Maitreya. Based on the in-game flavor text, the faith is essentially dedicated to wiping out all other Buddhist faiths off the face of the map. Mechanically, this tenet is basically 2-for-1 combination. It merges the effects of Aniconism, which grants piety for destroying artifacts, with Gruesome Festival, gives piety for executing characters, ranging from 25 piety for lowborns up to 500 piety for emperors and kings. It's also a unique decision, claims the Mantle of Maitreya. Taking this decision gives your character a powerful modifier with some serious trade-offs. You can take a large opinion penalty, but in return you gain increased income, better reinforcement rates, a heavily reduced population opinion penalty, and a massive plus 100 faith fervor, which is huge for religious conversions. Can't really generate piety outside of the artifact destruction and executions, and every other Buddhist faith will probably absolutely hate you. As for ranking the Extinction of Dharma, I love a good deal, especially a 2-for-1. This one is an easy S tier. And as we've established before, because it is a DLC exclusive tenet, it must be dropped down 1 rank. So unfortunately, A tier. Filial Piety, the respect your elders tenet. In game terms, that gives you plus 20 opinion with your parents, ensures your parents gain a perpetual hook on your newborn children, and makes burdened trait rare. Last part is especially handy if you're trying to climb the bureaucratic ladder, since burden reduces merit gain and governance, making promotion more difficult. Overall, Filial Piety feels just okay. It could use one more meaningful bonus to make it truly worth it. Right now, 2 of these 3 bonuses you can effectively get just by being a parent or guardian. It would be amazing if the additional bonuses like groom to rule type bonuses, but as it stands, I'm giving this tenet a D tier. Here's another All Under Heaven exclusive tenet. Harmonious Society. This one is all about keeping the peace. Everything must be balanced, individuals, nature, and society. The Son of Heaven sets the tempo and everyone else follows his lead. In CK3 terms, this means you have much higher success rate when it comes to swaying characters, gaining piety from swaying schemes on your liege or vassal, and zealot is more common amongst the followers of this faith. I like the concept, but it feels like a half-baked idea. It would make sense if it also encouraged friendship or discouraged rivalries within society. For a ranking, Harmonious Society probably sits right next to Filial Piety. Not really worth adding to the faith unless you plan on swaying people constantly throughout your run. Finally, we have one of the tenets that doesn't give gluttony as a sinful trait, hedonistic. All about enjoying life and having a good time. Almost any faith can add this as one of their 3 tenets, except for those with Mendicant Preacher and Monasticism. And for some reason, some of the dualist religions seems random, but I'm not a theologian, just a guy with an opinion. What does this tenet do? Every feast you complete grants 100 piety, which can be stacked with ritual celebration. You also get 20% stress loss, and temperance is considered a sin, giving you a fun little flavor addition. As for ranking of hedonism, feels very similar to ritual celebration, though it doesn't give you the ability to build breweries, which honestly seems like it should be included. If you want to see glutton in a positive light, this is the tenet for you. Since I'm always taking temperate, I'll give this indulgent tenet a C tier. This next one might be a bit confusing because we're covering 3 tenets at once for CK3. Why? Well, they all boil down to roughly the same concept with a few differences. All 3 give piety for executions. Human sacrifice lets you raid your neighbors for captives. That's a lot of work for 3 to 5 people. Fun fact, if you raid a fellow human sacrifice follower and lose, you have to surrender 3 to 5 of your own captives. Didn't know that until doing this video. sacrificial ceremonies, allows you to exit this life early if you're over the age of 60, in poor health, or incapable. Interestingly, even if you die this way, you still gain the piety for offing yourself. Get close to the threshold, you'll notice that the character devotion level increases on death's screen. Gruesome festival blots are more like feasts but held outside, and only followers of your faith will come. Event activity grants a decent amount of piety depending on who or what you're sacrificing. Exclusive to the Northern Lords DLC, and honestly I haven't used a blot in a while, so some of the finer details might be off. So how do we rank them? Human sacrifice and sacrificial ceremonies both deserve a B tier as they're slightly different and make them interesting in their own ways. Gruesome Festival / Blot gets an A tier because having a feast-like option that can also boost control over your population with a +50 bonus is really powerful. We're starting to see a lot of repeated concepts with a slight different in flavor. Inner Journey is essentially asceticism for Eastern faiths. It unlocks meditate in seclusion decision, it makes patient a virtue and impatient a sin, but it doesn't let you suddenly become an adventurer. A quick reminder, meditate in seclusion is basically a 6-month vacation where your character reflects on life. If all goes well, you return reduced stress, and if you really nailed it, get an extra point or two in learning. As with asceticism, there are much easier and more effective ways to reduce stress and gain learning, and you don't even get the option to become an adventurer. Does this drop it to a D tier? Not quite. We'll leave it Inner Journey alongside it with a C tier. This next tenet really feels like it should make hermits virtuous, since it's all about living far from society and practicing your belief in isolation. Pastoral isolation is only available to Christian faiths, and only one starts with it is Christiani. So what does it do? Well, it slows down your development growth and makes managing your realm a bit harder, but in exchange, county conversion rate are significantly higher. Other Christian faiths gain righteous trait and unlocks the tier 3 withdraw from view countermeasure, which makes it much harder for enemies to assassinate you while applying only a minor defensive penalty. You also gain a higher opinion from your liege if you follow a different faith. As for ranking, I don't see much value in this tenet. I'll be giving Pastoral Isolation a C. Creation, protection, transformation. Virtue comes from construction, from building something and watching it thrive. Preservation is a CK3 tenet exclusive to Hindu faiths. Introduced in All Under Heaven, it has a counterpart called Sacred Destruction, which we'll cover later. While Sacred Destruction is all about tearing things down, preservation is focused on building and creating, especially when it comes to temple holdings and temple citadels. With this tenet, construction are cheaper and faster, and you also gain small amounts of development in temple citadels. On top of that, architect is treated as a virtuous trait, big win for all the building focused dynasties out there. As for ranking, if you're not playing as a mandala government type, half this tenet benefits are wasted. Because of this restriction, I'm dropping it from an A to a B tier, though I still appreciate the flavor and the ability to build up unique temple structures. To take Pursuit of Knowledge as a tenet, you'll need to have CK3's All Under Heaven DLC. The restrictions don't stop there. You'll also need to be Buddhist, Confucius, or Taoist to add it to your faith. So what does Pursuit of Power do? It gives you much faster learning lifestyle experience, makes studying the schemes 15% more successful, turns a bunch of traits into virtuous, such as scholar, Confucius education, astute intellect, philosopher, and erudite oracle. Stack them all together and you can earn an extra 3 piety per month. Ranking Pursuit of Knowledge is easy. It's a solid B tier. It's one of those government-specific tenets because of outside of meritocracy and celestial government, you won't get much out of some of these bonuses. It would also be amazing to combine this with Alexandrian Catechism for 40% learning per month, but sadly, that's only available for Christians and Muslims. I haven't had the best experience with reincarnation. During our World Conquest run I did in CK3 ages ago, I added it to my faith thinking that over the long enough campaign I'd experience it at least once. For a campaign that went over, it's gonna go over 400 years. That's pretty bad. Nope, 4% really does mean 4%. It's an extremely rare event. That's exactly what I would have said if All Under Heaven hadn't added a new event that changes everything. Now you can actually choose your heir or favorite child to be reincarnated. When the event fires, that character gains the reincarnation trait, which provides 1 monthly piety. They also can inherit 1 or 2 traits from their ancestor, though this part feels pretty random. Outside of this, reincarnation mainly focuses on increasing county conversion resistance. Ranking reincarnation. Before the update, I would have given it a C purely because of how rare it was, but now that you can apply it to multiple children, it's more reliable. I'd comfortably place it at a B tier and possibly even an A, depending on how strong your ancestors are. Rite is a strange tenet, mainly because of why it exists. It was added around the Iberian struggles so that faith like Mozarabic and Insular could keep the Catholic Pope as the head of faith in Crusader Kings 3. In theory, a lot of faiths can take rite as long as they have a spiritual head of faith and their new tenets don't directly clash with that leader's faith. In practice, though, I've never really seen anyone use it outside of Christianity. So what does rite actually do? Creating or reforming a faith cheaper and easier, and characters of your faith like each other more. If you're using it as a Christian faith, you will also keep the ecumenical doctrine, which means other Christian faiths can't target you with holy wars. Rite is a weird one because it really boils down to a single question. Do you want the Pope to still have influence over your faith? If the answer is yes, then the rite does exactly what it says on the tin. From a gameplay perspective, you still give the Pope land and vassals, ask him for gold, but you can't be excommunicated or buy indulgences. It's a novel tenet, though using it with any other head of faith other than the Pope would absolutely be wild. Following that, we have ritual hospitality, or puja for Hindu faiths. I originally thought this was an activity you could manually perform, but nope, instead it's a yearly interaction you can use on landed characters to give them a +20 opinion at the cost of some piety. On top of that, 0.3 monthly piety for each powerful vassal serving on your council. Most Eastern faiths, along with few pagan ones, can have this tenet. It also makes generous a virtuous trait, whereas callous a sinful one. Ranking this, having access to a reliable +20 boost every single year, honesty is really strong, especially when keeping most of your characters above 80 opinion is all you need to do to prevent a rebellion. I'm feeling generous, so we're going to put this in a comfortable A tier. When we grow old or sick, we perform a ritual to cleanse our souls of sin. Once that is done, we quickly and definitively end our lives so that the sin does not have a chance to take hold once more. That's the flavor text behind ritual suicide, also known as Endura for certain Christian faiths. In practice, this tenet is basically sacrificial ceremonies, but without any of the piety bonuses you get from executing characters of different ranks. Most faiths can actually take ritual suicide, with the main exception being Islam and a handful of random pagan faiths. Side note, I once had an idea for a challenge run using ritual suicide, but modded so it can be taken at any time. The rule would be simple. Every time a character turns 18, they must immediately perform the ritual. The entire run would revolve around constantly playing as a child ruler. I feel like that would get incredibly tough, especially if you don't have a large family lined up. So how does Endura actually stack up? At the end of the day, it's just a more widely available version of sacrificial ceremonies without the extra bonuses, which puts it in a firm C tier. Sacred childbirth is a tenet entirely focused on children and birth in Crusader Kings 3. First up, +10 fertility, which is especially useful when your ruler is older and still hasn't produced an heir. Next up, it gets -50% pregnancy complications chance, which to my knowledge is the only consistent way to reduce this risk outside of a few random wet nurse. When a child is born within wedlock, both parents get 250 piety. Children born outside wedlock still grant piety, but only 50. That's a huge difference, especially when more rulers will have anywhere from 3 to 15 children over a lifetime. On top of all that, pregnancy is considered a virtuous trait, meaning you gain extra piety every month during the full 9 months. This tenet doesn't seem to have a restriction, but mostly only shows up in Jewish faiths, Vindalists, and Wahi. The combination of a massive piety generation per child is drastically reduced pregnancy complication easily earns sacred childbirth an A tier rating for me. There can be no creation without destruction. For something new to begin, something old must end. Sacred destruction is a tenet unique to Hindu faiths in Crusader Kings 3 and actually comes with a pretty distinct perk. You gain piety for winning sieges. But there's a downside, at least for your enemies. Offensive sieges reduce county development up to 2 points. If you really want to be a menace, you could absolutely cripple a rival's economy by repeatedly sieging their highest development counties until internal unrest starts to spiral out of control. On top of that, Sacred Destruction grants additional prowess per level of devotion and a flat +10 men at arms damage, making it a strong perk for aggressive player styles. Purely for how unique it is and how well it fits with a warmongering Hindu faith, I'm going to give Sacred Destruction an A tier. The next tenet on our ranking list is one that I have not truly used at all. Sanction false conversion. Characters to pretend to convert to another faith. Beyond this mechanic, it also provides plus 30% county conversion resistance and a small bonus to a monthly intrigue lifestyle experience. The main requirement for this tenet seems to be that you can't be a Christian, can't already have pastoral isolation tenet. Other than that, pretty freely to include it without actually leaning into the false conversion mechanic at all. Personally, I don't really use the false conversion side of this game. It's much more fleshed out back in CK2, and in CK3 feels fairly limited. Because of its niche application, there are usually far more useful tenets competing for that top 3 spots. I'm giving Sanctioned False Conversion a C tier. Struggle and Submission is a tenet used by Muslim and dualist faiths in Crusader Kings 3 that allows them to call Great Holy Wars. Or in the late game, the Great Holy My Computer is on Fire, where wars are happening with half the map involved. It also provides an additional county conversion speed per holy site. Completing a pilgrimage grants same faith opinion modifiers. It unlocks becoming an adventure decision, which is fine, but limited since only counts and dukes can actually use it. This is a strong tenet if your main goal is to access Great Holy Wars. Personally, though, I still think the Catholic version, Great Holy Wars, is better. It gives you time to prepare instead of firing instantly, and the conquering kingdom goes to the top participant rather than the head of faith. Ranking, dedicated Holy War enjoyers, Struggle and Submission earns a solid B. So what do you actually get from worshipping the sun in CK3? Sun worship was originally Zunbil only tenet, but with all under heaven, both Tolotang and Hantuism, 2 faith that holy sites in modern day Indonesia now have access to it as well. The tenet grants reduced attrition in deserts and desert mountain terrain, increases piety for hosting feasts in May, June, or July, and access the sun trial interaction with prisoners. So what exactly is a sun trial? If you have an imprisoned character who's committed a crime, you can expose them to the sun to determine their guilt. If they die, well, clearly guilty. If they survive, they gain the Blessed by the Sun modifier, which gives an opinion boost and 3 monthly piety. Funny enough, if they survive and you still want them gone, you can choose to have them murdered outright, though this can give you the murder trait if you're discovered. As for ranking sun worship, the sun trial alone is a rare but fun mechanic that bumps this tenet up to a B tier. I do wish that it offers one more bonus like special sun temple building or terrain combat advantage, but overall it's solid. Want a tenet that's all about bears? Then Takamin is the tenet for you. As long as you have All Under Heaven DLC, you can add it to most pagan faiths. This tenet really embodies the love of the hunt. For every bear you kill during a hunt, you gain either 1 martial or 1 prowess, and hunters are considered virtuous. If you're a duke or higher, you also unlock a bear sighting event every 5 years. During these hunts, you can capture these bears instead of killing them and save it for later sacrifice bear decision. Sacrificing a bear grants different modifiers such as increasing levies and army damage, or a bonus to holding taxes and control growth. Funny enough, even if you capture the bear, you will still receive a memento from that hunt. I really like this tenet. It makes hunting feel worth doing every time a bear sighting pops up. I'd rate it as an S tier, but DLC tax knocks it down to an A. Taxes. You hate them, I hate them, but they're kind of necessary to keep the run running in CK3. This next tenet is all about squeezing money out of people through faith. Tax non-believers. It is an interesting tenet because it gives it plus 20% tax for vassals of different faiths, at the cost of a slower levy reinforcement rate from those same vassals. It also unlocks special tax policies depending on your government type. For feudal government, you can enact jizya status, an additional tax law that grants 4% taxes and a 20% opinion from affected vassals, but you lose the ability to revoke the title demand conversion, or convert their counties altogether. For a clan government type, the restrictions are similar, but instead you gain a flat 100% tax per year at the cost of a heavily reduced levy contribution. Personally, I haven't used this tenet much since ruling over lands of different faiths usually leads to constant rebellion. That said, seeing just how much gold you can pull in makes it tempting, especially if you're dealing with Republic vassals who tend to be rich but don't provide many levies anyways. Taxing the non-believers is available to any faith, oddly excluding Christians. This one will unfortunately be a C tier. Rebellions can be tedious. To really make this tenet work, you'll need to pair it with a tradition or doctrine that makes it other faiths see you as righteous or at least tolerant, otherwise they'll rise up every few years. When you think about the most violent tenet in CK3, mind probably jumps to Blot or Cranial Trophies. Both are brutal, ritualistic, and incredibly grim for anyone unlucky enough to live on the CK3 map. But honestly, I'd argue the most destructive tenet in the game is warmongering, simply because of how much chaos it can unleash on an entire realm. For the unfamiliar, warmongering is a tenet only a small handful of faiths can have access to. It does a lot, but its core strength is simple. It lets you declare on your neighbors whenever you want. You gain a county and duchy CB regardless of justification, plus a once per lifetime invasion CB that allows you to seize massive chunks of land in a single war. Warmongering also allows members of the clergy to serve as commanders or knights, letting you ignore restricted clergy doctrines. It unlocks great holy wars, prevents negative vassal and popular opinion penalties for declaring wars, and basically removes any reason to ever stop fighting. As long as you have the gold and troops, you can stay at war indefinitely. On top of that, if you're Ostrich or Northern Germanic heritage, it makes Berserker trait far more common. S tier, no questions. Only real downside is the lower vassal opinion if you stay at peace for more than 6 months, which with this tenet, you probably won't. I kind of forgot about this tenet, so that's why it's at the end of the list. This is probably one of the most unique tenets in CK3, not because of what it does, but because of how you unlock it. One of the only tenets that actually requires you to form a nation first. To access it, you need to form Rome as the Byzantines, which then unlocks the decision to convert to Hellenistic faith with Household Gods tenet added in. On top of that, you'll need the Roads to Power DLC just to access it at all. Since it's a DLC tenet, you'll expect it to be pretty stacked, and it mostly is. You gain additional influence, converting to another faith is cheaper, counties of a different faith dislike you less. You also get faster faith conversion in counties of correct culture, faster culture conversion in counties, and improved reinforcement speed for the same faith. On top of that, Augustus and Born in the Purple are considered virtuous traits. Overall, it's a nice tenet, but being locked behind a paywall and restricted to Hellenistic faith makes it far less appealing. I'll put it in a C tier. We're down to the final 6 tenets. If you've been rocking with us this long, you're an absolute trooper. This last one we're going to cover pretty rapid fire because they're all the syncretic tenets. What does that mean? Any faith can take a syncretic tenet. Doing so lets you borrow at least one virtuous and one sin from another religion. Use the artifacts normally restricted to that religion and gain plus 30 mutual opinion with that character and counties that follow it. It also makes your faith and their faith treat each other as astray or hostile instead of hostile or evil. Each faith can only have one syncretic tenet. Christian syncreticism. There are about 19 Christian faiths in the game, but realistically, only about 8 of them ever show up on the map at once. The big downside here is that it does not make you ecumenical, so you'll still be a valid crusade target. Because of that, this one lands in a B tier. Islamic syncretism. Islam has roughly 20 faiths total, but like Christianity, only about 5 tend to be present in the game at most at any time. It's useful in the right region, but fairly limited overall. This one also sits comfortably at a B tier. Jewish syncretism. There are 7 Jewish faiths in the game, but depending on the map, you might only see 1 or 2 present. There are definitely Jewish diaspora scattered around, but very little land is usually controlled by them, unless you're in Iberia or get a specific event chain. Because of that limited interaction, this is a C tier. Dharmic syncretism, formerly known as Eastern syncretism. This covers one of the largest religious groups in the game, around 33 faiths, second only to the pagans. If you're playing in India or East, it is incredibly strong and easily an A tier. Outside of the East, though, it is much less relevant unless something wild happens like the early conversion of the Mongols. Syntic syncretism. Want better odds of marrying into Imperial China? This tenet might help. Beyond that, it only covers about 5 faiths, making it a far weaker syncretic group overall. Because of that niche, it ends up in a C tier. Syncretic folk tradition. This one covers the massive 46 faiths, all treated as astray or evil instead of worse. The catch is that once one of these faiths is reformed, they drop off the pagan list entirely. Outside of a few African faiths, the AI rarely reforms, so this stays useful for most of the game. Overall, a B tier. So, what do you think? Did we ruffle some feathers with our ranking system? Most likely. Let's see what controversy comes of this video. This was a very fun experience. I think it was worth the hundreds of hours we put into it. If you did like it and would love to subscribe to our channel, it would be great. Like and subscribe, comment, do all those wonderful engagement things. Also, let us know what your personal ranking list would be. I think wildly different, especially now with All Under Heaven out and some of these tenets not known to the wider CK3 populace. That's all I have for you today. Thanks very much for watching this. If you did enjoy this, you know what to do.